Good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin tonight's program with Brown's land acknowledgement. Brown is located in Providence, Rhode Island, on lands that are within the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Indian tribe. The Narragansett Indian tribe, whose ancestors stewarded these lands with great care, continues as a sovereign nation today. We commit to working together to honor our past and build our future with truth. The Haffenreffer Museum has a long history of collaborating with the Narragansett people. We've hosted a number of educational talks, workshops, and performances over the years. We have a special relationship with the Tomaqua Museum, our sister museum, and are especially excited about their own MOVE project. They're moving from Exeter to the University of Rhode Island campus. Please check out their website. So it's now my pleasure to welcome you to the final event of the Haffenreffer Museum of Anthropology to be held here in Manning Hall. This is a bittersweet event for us. We're leaving Manning Hall in its central campus location. But at the same time, we're eagerly anticipating our move downtown to the Jewelry District. We invite you to our first Davol Square event in the fall of next year. We've been in Manning Hall for 21 years. In 2003, Shep Preck secured the building for our use as our main gallery. The gallery opened in 2004 and has been the premier location for our exhibitions ever since. Our first exhibit was called Works Beads. It was the result of students in the Museum Studies class taught by Shep Preck and Deputy Director Kevin Smith. It showcased the museum's collections of textiles from Africa, the Americas, and Southeast Asia to examine globalization from an anthropological perspective. The centerpiece was a textile veil weighing 500 pounds. In 2010, Director Steve Lubar established Culture Lab, right over here. Inspired by Nature Lab at RISD and the idea of the new museum, he wanted to provide opportunities for students and visitors alike to acquire hands-on experience with objects from the museum's permanent collection. It was a big success and still continues today. Thank you, Steve. Steve's here in the audience. Our final exhibition, which you see all around you, was created by the students of a class taught by Balaji Campbell, professor of painting at RISD, and Terry Gentis, right here, our head curator at the Haffenreffer Museum. Entitled A Very Drunk Hunter's Dream, Modernist Expression in Africa, it presents paintings by Ghanaian and Nigerian artists, Richmond T. Akam, all the artists are identified here and their biographies are on the wall here. Richmond T. Akam, Anne Blankston Hemmings, Otto Deleke, Ablade Glover, Asiru Olatudne, Kwe Odin, Larry Otu, Twin 77, and an Austrian artist who also became Nigerian, Suzanne Wenger, who is responsible for this piece on the wall right behind you. These artists defied the confines of colonial rule and developed a distinctive visual vocabulary drawing from their cultural and historical pasts and generative of new futures. What makes this exhibition distinctive is that the paintings are presented in dialogue with wooden and metal sculpture, printed and woven textiles, royal paraphernalia, plastic dolls, and a fantasy coffin in the back of the room, the material culture of a modernist Africa. The good news is that we will still have a presence on College Hill. We have satellite exhibitions and display cases at 3 other facilities: the Stephen Roberts Center, the Rockefeller Library, and the Joukowsky Institute for Archaeology and the Ancient World. In fact, I would like to invite you to come see our newest exhibition in the Roberts Center, installed just 2 days ago. It's entitled Seed Keeping and was curated by Professor Shanti Morel-Hart in connection with her symposium, Seed Pasts, Seeding Futures, on Saturday, April 12th. Please consult the Joukowsky Institute website for more details. I now want to extend a few thanks, especially to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Annenberg Foundation, and the Haffenreffer Family Foundation. I'm very pleased to say that David Haffenreffer and Kristen Haffenreffer are here this evening. I also want to thank President Christina Paxson and Provost Frank Doyle and Rick Locke, Executive VP of Planning and Policy Russell Carey, Deputy Provost Janet Bloom and Joe Micel, Deans of Faculty Kevin McLaughlin and Leah Van Way, Chairs of Anthropology Dan Smith and Jessa Weaver, who is here, and Directors of the Jagowski Institute of Archaeology and Ancient World, Peter Von Dahlman, Andrew Scher, and John Sherry, who's here. There are many other administrators and colleagues that have also supported the Haffenreffer Museum, and I don't have time to go into them, naming them all right here, so please forgive me if I haven't mentioned you. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our panelists, and we'll get started on the presentation for this evening. So I will talk about the new vision for the Haffenreffer Museum. I will then turn things over to my colleague Terry Gentis, who's the head curator, as we mentioned. And he will give us a little history of the Haffenreffer Museum from Rudolf Haffenreffer all the way up to the present. Kelly Bowers, our associate curator, is going to speak on learning from NAGPRA. And then finally, Christina Hodge will wind things up. She's our associate director, and she will share with us the new developments with the big move. So let's. All right, I think I'll just sit down for this, if you don't mind. So I think we're all familiar with the fact that museums are commonly in the news, and more these days, given the financial situations that many of them are facing. But most importantly, museums are rethinking their roles within society. There is an ongoing and long overdue critical conversation about their origins, their collecting histories, and their representational authorities. And this has led to a rethinking of the functions of museums and a growing awareness of the importance of engaging with the needs and agendas of diverse communities, including descendant communities. There's a new ethic that is emerging that sees museums not simply as passive repositories of objects and collections, but as active participants in society. They're increasingly taking on challenging new roles, complex social issues, and seeking to promote greater and deeper cross-cultural understandings. As a leading university museum, the Haffenreffer Museum is developing a new vision that highlights objects in motion. In fact, it's the movement of objects into and out of collections that provides key insights into the circulation of culture. So what do I mean by that? What I'm thinking about here is questions about how do objects come into museums? How do museums acquire objects? How do they engage with objects once they're within the museum? And under what circumstances do objects leave museums? How does the circulation of objects inform us about different cultural values? What does this process offer in understanding challenging questions about cultural representation, heritage, and identity? One of the most exciting aspects of working in a museum is when you're able to share collections with some of the descendant communities for whose collections you hold in stewardship, you steward or hold in trust. This image represents a visit that we had last November, where you see Doug Anderson on the left, Hannah Loon in the middle, and Norma Ballett on the right, Inupiat elders from Selawik, Alaska. Doug and Wani Anderson knew them as girls when they were doing field work in Alaska. And so it was really wonderful for the two women to be able to look at some of the objects that were actually made by their parents and grandparents. Just this March, we hosted Santiago Luciano and America Kumapa, two Huni Kunin traditional knowledge keepers from Ucayal, Peru. They were here to look at the collections that were donated to us by a famous cultural anthropologist, Kenneth Kensinger, who was based up at Bennington College. They were particularly interested, not so much in the objects, although they were interested in those, they were interested in the songs that Kiesinger recorded, and they were able to hear the voices of their ancestors singing songs that they wanted to reintroduce into their communities. So I will end with this slide just to remind you that we, the Haffenreffer Museum, is Brown's teaching and research museum. We serve our students first and foremost, and you see here in this image not only students, but visitors to looking at the collections. We have visitors here from Paris looking at some of the collections, as well as Native American scholars who are interested in working with us. So at this point, I'm going to turn over the presentation to my colleague, Terry Gentis, who is going to share a little history.
Thank you. Well, a little history. Start with the founder, our founder, Rudolf Frederick Haffenreffer. Rudolf,
There you go.
there we go, sorry. So the son of German immigrants in Boston in the late 19th century, Rudolf purchased the lands of Mount Hope, and in 1903, the interest in collecting started very early. He started amassing large collections of archaeological materials, well over 60,000 items were in the collection when it came to Brown. But Rudolf was interested in Native Americans. He was not just interested in their artifact, he was also very interested in the people and the living people. So the land that he purchased had significance and meaning because it was the land that was traditionally the home of King Philip and the home of the leaders of the Wampanoag Nation in the 16th century, 17th century, when the Pilgrims arrived. So he understood that this was very significant. But he quickly amassed collections not just from local people, but also in the entire North American continent. So trips to the Southwest because of his interest in the lead and silver mines that he owned in Utah and California. So he traveled the Santa Fe Railroad and would acquire things there. So the collections grew and grew. One of the things that really sets him apart from other collectors of the time was that he hired a native consultant and worker to interpret his collections in the land and to host visits at the museum. He hired Chief Leroy Perry, Osamequin, which was the Wampanoag leader at the time in the early 20th century. I believe Leroy Perry was Pocasset Wampanoag, but he lived on the property and interpreted Rudolph's collections, which is unusual for that time. Leroy was a Baptist minister, but also one of the main leaders of the Wampanoag Nation at that time. And we have a wonderful portrait of him with his signature there. So that is not a typical attitude for collectors at that time. Following Rudolf Haffenreffer's death in 1955, his family donated the collections to Brown, and that's when Barnaby Keeney accepted the collection for Brown, the then president of the university. Here you see him in the exhibition hall at the Haffenreffer Museum in Bristol. And you can see the variety and that everything was absolutely on view in the museum. Nothing was in storage. It was totally open storage. So with this acquisition began anthropology at Brown, and the first director of the museum, Louis Giddings, came from University of Pennsylvania, and he was an Arctic archaeologist. That is why we have such a strong connection with the Arctic programs and the native people of Alaska, because he would have field seasons in Alaska throughout his life in the 60s while he was director. The interesting thing about the museum, Rudolf Haffenreffer had called his museum the King Philip Museum in honor of the leader of the Wampanoag in the 17th century. Excuse me. But when Louis Giddings changed the name of the collections, it became the Museum of the American Indian. So that was the first Brown holding of the museum. It became the Museum of the American Indian, very much in the vein of the George Hyde Museum of the American Indian. But very quickly, just a year or two after being at Brown and anthropology as a discipline started, the museum was renamed. It became the Anthropology Museum. And some of the first collections to come in were field collections from Kenya, from graduate students who had worked with Kamba people. The image that you see of Giddings is actually in a gallery that he opened, and with a loan of materials from the University of Pennsylvania, because the museum was so heavily focused on Native American. There was no African collection, there was no oceanic material, it was very limited, but he wanted a greater vision, anthropology, global collections. And so the first collections that came to the museum were major loans from the University of Pennsylvania. But very quickly, field collections came into the museum from different parts of the world. So the Laboratory for Circumpolar Studies, the laboratory was a separate entity until 2022, which is fairly recent. But all along, it was a working model for anthropology, archaeology students here at Brown. Expeditions would leave from Bristol, pack up everything needed for a field season in the summer. And here you have a photograph taken by Giddings, probably, yes, 1964 at Cape Denby, which is a site known as Onion Portage. And here you have the Giddings family, the children, and that's Giddings, his wife, who became a curator at the museum, as well as 3 Brown students, graduate students in anthropology, archaeologists, and Inupiaq people, because Giddings was very interested in having an involvement with the Inupiaq people and the descendants of these, the members of these expeditions who worked right along the students and Giddings, have a very strong connection with this museum. Let's see. So our involvement with Native people is a continuing interest, and it's continued throughout the museum histories. There's always been the notion that the collections are other people's collections. They belong to Native people. And we have another very strong connection for our museum, for the Haffenreffer Museum, is the Kiowa collections that Rudolf Haffenreffer initially made. He made purchases directly from extended members of Kiowa families. And these collections are significant because the Kiowas have connections with these objects. They have seen these objects. And more recently, we've had some Kiowa families come and decide that they wanted this museum, to hold collections for them in safekeeping for the future. So we have a drum made by the Atone family, which was literally, they drove it up from Oklahoma to the museum to deposit it at the museum. But here you see Vanessa Jennings, who's a famous bead worker. Vanessa was invited for one of our programs, but she also worked on one of the historic Kiowa cradles in the collection that had been damaged historically. Rudolph purchased these cradles from Kiowa people, but one of the cradles was badly damaged. And in restoration, we don't restore things, we don't repair things, but we were able to have a Kiowa bead worker who has connections with the families who originally owned these cradles, actually repair the cradles. So we were able to have a wonderful continuity of materials being worked on by a traditional artist, rather than having a conservator, non-native person work on these. And this was part of this became important for a collaboration with the RISD Museum. They had an exhibition on repairs. The cradle was in one of the items that was borrowed from that exhibition. Barbara Hale, of course, is well known as one of the curators of the museum, still active, and also was interim director for quite a while, following Jane Dwyer. She was curator until Shep Kretsch came into was hired by the anthropology department. The anthropology department and the directorship of the museum have always been conjoined since its beginning. The professor teaches in the department and directs the museum. So finally, bringing it up to the present, we have this exhibition hall, and we had to close our galleries in Bristol. We were offered the opportunity by Ruth Simmons to have this space, which was renovated for these exhibitions. And the Cultural Lab, of course, as mentioned by Bob, about that Steve Lubar initiated, a highly successful program space. Too small, you can only host a few people in there, and the demand was very high, so we would eventually take over the entire gallery for some of these programs, classes, students' research, and not just for Brown, but RISD, as well as other classes. So I will turn it over to Kelly. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, and there we go. That one. Just like, thank you. Good evening, and thank you all for being here to reflect on our past and look toward our future. Again, I'm Kelly Bowers, and I'm very pleased to be the Haffenreffer Museum's first associate curator for repatriation and provenance. Bob spoke earlier about a vision that connects and amplifies the relationship between museums, objects, and stakeholder communities. My role at the Haffenreffer is centered on an important aspect of that vision, and that's repatriation. As you've already heard a little bit about this evening, the Haffenreffer is unique in that it has always included Native American voices since its earliest days, and has long sought to engage the indigenous people that the collections represent. However, we would fail in achieving this new vision if we did not recognize the harmful legacy of anthropology in anthropology as a whole, and our own ongoing responsibilities to those descendant communities both here and abroad. One of these responsibilities is compliance with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. So tonight, I'd like to tell you a little bit about NAGPRA and highlight some of our work. So what is NAGPRA? NAGPRA was passed into law in 1990. It provides a legal mechanism for federally recognized Native American tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations to request the repatriation or return of human remains and certain cultural items from institutions that receive federal funds. NAGPRA is both federal Indian law and human rights legislation. By enacting it, Congress recognized both the special relationship that it has with sovereign Native American nations and that human remains of any ancestry must at all times be treated with dignity and respect. So what is covered under NAGPRA? NAGPRA covers 4 categories of materials. The first is Native American human remains, or ancestral remains. These are the physical remains of a Native American person who was removed from their resting place. The second category is funerary objects. These are belongings or items that were placed in Native American burials and then subsequently removed. The next is objects of cultural patrimony. These are objects that have ongoing historical, traditional, or cultural importance that is still central to a Native American group today. These items were and are inalienable from that group. Finally, sacred objects are items that are needed for the ongoing practice of religious or spiritual beliefs. So next, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the regulations that implement the law. These are sort of the directions, so to speak, on how to meet the requirements. There's been a major uptick in media coverage related to NAGPRA in the past few years, leading up to and after the publishing of revised regulations. These revised regulations went into effect in January of 2024, and they've made a huge impact on museums and federal agencies that are required to do this work. So some of the highlights of the revised regulations include language that strengthens the authority and the role of tribes by requiring deference to indigenous knowledge, the requirement for institutions to obtain free, prior, and informed consent before allowing access to, research on, or exhibition of human remains or cultural items. They also eliminated the category of culturally unidentifiable remains. This means that there is now a pathway for the reburial of Native remains that cannot be reasonably connected to a modern group. The new regulations are also designed to increase transparency and reporting of holdings or collections, and they advocate for the protection of sensitive information from disclosure to the public. Finally, and most importantly, the new regulations update the timelines and the deadline for compliance. So now that we've been over a little bit of what NAGPRA is, I want to highlight one of the aspects of our NAGPRA work that's ongoing. HMA's Laboratory of Circumpolar Studies is a federal repository for the Arctic collections made by Giddings and Doug Anderson that we heard about earlier tonight. The museum currently has a cooperative agreement with the National Park Service to inventory these collections and to assist with any outstanding NAGPRA issues. Through this work, we've been able to facilitate several repatriations, and those have helped forge and strengthen relationships with those Native Alaskan communities, and those have extended beyond our requirements of NAGPRA work. Next, I wanted to direct you to our website. We're committed to continuing and expanding our repatriation work in earnest and with transparency. From our main page, that one, you can click on the Repatriation and NAGPRA tag to read more about our ethos and see reporting of our work. I wanted to close by including this photo from a repatriation to the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians in 2022. I hope this gives some faces and life to what could otherwise just be called compliance work. NAGPRA is so special and important. Not only does it look to acknowledge and address injustices, but it also brings people together and hopefully provides insights and healing for those involved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. All right, so I am Christina Hodge. I'm the Associate Director of the Haffenreffer, and I am really excited to continue these conversations with a glimpse of where we are going with all of this history and all of these ambitions and all of these responsibilities and all of these collaborators, and that is to One Davol Square, down in the Jewelry District, facing Point Street here. This is the southern facade. So it's about a 20-minute walk from where we are now. And it is a lot closer than where we are in Bristol, Rhode Island, which is where the collections live, where our staff live. So we're very, very excited about this potential and the relocation that is well underway, as you'll see. So just so you have an idea of our schedule, fall 2024, winter 2025, so that's like just very recently. We've been doing packing and micro moves of some of our collections to offsite storage. You can see one of many piles of boxes building over there in Bristol right now. April and May, so that is now. We are moving out of Manning, which you know, and is maybe why you're here, helping us say goodbye to this wonderful space. So through August of 2025, so through the end of the summer, we're going to be doing a lot of packing, our collections staff over there in Bristol. Mid-August 2025 is when we get the keys to the new space, which is very exciting, but it doesn't mean we can open the new space. It means we start moving into the new space and moving a collection of 150,000 objects plus 800,000 objects in the Circumpolar Lab, plus the books and the archives and the ... is going to be a process. especially to do it carefully and well. So we're planning for that to take most of a year, actually, to get that going. By the fall of winter of 2026, we'll be kind of settling in, reorganizing into what is a very different kind of a space than what we've gotten used to over there in Bristol and in our historic home. So keep an eye out for some soft opening, smaller events as that's happening. But then spring, summer 2027, which maybe to you seems like far away, but for us in the middle of the move seems very, very near. We'll be looking to do some wider public openings at that time, so please keep your eye out on the press. I want to note also that there's people on the move and there's collections on the move. Our slideshow that will roll again and was rolling as we were starting up shows more of this than I can here, but here are just some of the faces and actions there. As of a couple days ago, we had packed about 7,000 objects, but there's tens of thousands to go. So we're doing it with a fantastic team of staff. We're doing it with fantastic contractors as well. So it really is a group effort to make this happen. This is a schedule of the timeline. So basically, as we are doing our packing, there's also construction happening over there at Davol Square. If anybody is in the neighborhood and you've seen kind of the dump buckets out of the windows and cordons off around the building, it's us. That's what's happening. And that really started in earnest just this past summer. And so that phase is going to be wrapping up after a year in this following summer. So there's been huge progress there that I'm really happy to share publicly for the first time, some of those images with you right now. So I don't know if there are folks in the audience who knew Davol when it was a mall, like a 1980s style mall or other iterations of the space. But if you did, you might recognize this image on the left of the atrium of this space. So it is a 3.5-story brick turn-of-the-century factory building that we're adaptive reusing for a museum, which is not maybe your first thought, but it's providing a really exciting opportunity for us and our architectural contractors, Kite, to really design an amazing new home for our collections and our new phase of the museum. So when it's done, it'll probably look something like what you're seeing on the right. So the second and third floors are going to be everything in Bristol moving into those full floors. And then we will also be getting a component of the first floor. So if you were visiting our collections, you would kind of come through this atrium. In the far right rear of the image, there's an elevator that you would take up, and that would take you up to the third floor where you would meet our staff, a lot of offices up there. We would welcome you into the space. This is a little elevator lobby where we'll have some visible storage. And besides that, we have a lot of office rooms, but also engagement rooms. So research rooms, meeting rooms, and a reading room for students to come and others to come and engage with us as well. And then everything that's blue in this image is collections storage. So there's a picture on the left of what some of the construction looked like just a few weeks ago, and on the right is a kind of early virtual rendering of what the reading room is going to look like. So you would come and be welcomed here by our administrative manager, Ariel, on the left, and then kind of walk through. And we will have, in the final rendering, like books and seating and other things in this space when I'm sure you will come to visit us on the third floor. The second floor is focused more on collections, workspace, and offices. Very similar setup, additional visible storage, staff offices, another research room, and then additional collection storage as well. And right now, this is what main storage looks like, which is just vast room where we're going to have just rows and rows of our collections living in comfort, we expect, in the new space. For the public, our sort of version of this space is going to be going into the first floor over at Davol. About half of the existing space on the first floor will be devoted for our public museum engagement, teaching, and exhibition space in different spaces, which is very exciting because here it's all in the same space. So it all in the new space can happen simultaneously without being on top of each other. So you would kind of come in and cross the atrium and then enter a little lobby seating area where you would turn right to go into our main gallery and our flex gallery. So we'll have a gallery space that's about the same size as this, plus an additional smaller gallery for students, short-term, experimental, artistic stuff that we can utilize as well. And then you would turn left to go into the new culture lab, which will be several times the size of the existing culture lab. And that'll be very exciting as well. So this is kind of what the old atrium looks like, and this is on the right a view of what that new museum public entrance will be. So you would go through this archway, there's a little lobby seating area. To the right is the galleries, to the left is the culture lab. The main gallery looks like this photo in the upper left right now, but eventually it will look more like the gallery you see rendered on the bottom right, with track lighting and cases, and be a really flexible space for us to have medium or longer term exhibits. So we're very, very excited about that. And then we're also extremely excited to have a dedicated culture lab as well. So beautiful big arched windows, letting us have seating for more than 6 students at a time, so that'll be very cool, as well as an area for object study, visible storage, and we're planning, when the culture lab's not in use, to have it open to the public, so the public could come through as well, like they can now, to see what the Brown students, other students in the area are working on. So those are our visions for the space in the future. This is kind of the beauty shot rendering of what the atrium will look like, with our sort of entrance to the lobby, beautiful brick facade, kind of informative windows, a little vitrine with an exhibit in the back. And we're really, really excited to be moving to that space pretty soon now. So with that, I wanted to say thanks, extend Bob's thanks from our opening introduction to past staff members, present staff members, the Friends Board that existed in the past, as well as our present advisory board, so many donors of collections and the things we take care of, as well as those who have supported us in other ways, faculty fellows who have contributed to so many exhibits, some of which are in the slideshow, our student, staff, and interns, past, present, future, some of whom are here tonight, as well as other colleagues at Brown, especially partners at Anthro, Jakowski, Hay Library, JCB, NACI, RISD, the list kind of goes on there, but we definitely do not do any of this on our own. And so we also thank our many, many external collaborators and consultants and guests for sharing their time and their insights and their wisdom with us over these years, and we're very excited to be welcoming folks into the new space in 2026, 2027. And this is finally a list of our staff. So if you look for these folks, I think everybody's here tonight. So find us. And if you would like to ask more about the PAC or the collections or any of our work, find us and please do.